Ronald Robboy is a musician and independent scholar. In 1971 at UC San Diego, he organized a klezmer band with composer Paulina Oliveros to accompany a reading by poet Jerome Rothenberg. And in 1981, his experimentalist neo-klezmer Big Jewish Band appeared in New York at both The Kitchen and MoMA. He provided music for videos by conceptual artist Eleanor Antine in the 1970s, and he also appeared in The Man Without a World 1991. So there's a challenge, see if you can find Ron in there. Her silent film for which Alicia Spiegels and Donald Sosa have recently created a new score. Robboy's own score for Molly Picon's silent film East and West was commissioned in 1995 at the San Diego Jewish Film Festival. As senior researcher for Michael Tilson Thomas's Tomaszewski project, Robboy developed the musical reconstructions that MTT premiered at Carnegie Hall in 2005. And last year, he led the YIVO team reconstructing Yiddish theater composer Joseph Rumshinsky's landmark operetta Shir HaShirim, which you can find on YouTube, and I highly recommend. Recent scholarly studies by Robboy of Abraham Elstein's film scores and of Molly Picon's song lyrics have been praised for their depth and originality. He lives in San Diego, where for many years he was a cellist in the opera and symphony orchestras. And I'd just like to add that I think for many of us in this room, Ron has been incredibly generous with his time in advising on the most minute points and delving deeper than anyone could ever have thought one could delve. So thank you for that, and we're delighted to have you speak today.
Thank you so much, Danielle. Do I have the right glasses? I had a dream in symphony going out on stage completely unclothed, totally naked, just a cello and my glasses, and sitting down and going, oh shit, wrong glasses. Every orchestra player of a certain age will totally appreciate that. Okay. Can't read it here. I'll hold it. Okay. As our dear colleague Mark Slobin has pointed out in the interview with Alicia and Donald, the story explored in the ancient law, a story of a young Jewish man, the son of a rabbi, seeking to leave the confines of his rigid traditional upbringing, enters the wider entertainment world where he falls romantically for a Gentile woman. That story would in short order be explored in more films. The Jazz Singer of 1927, Dem Chazen Zindel, The Cantor's Son of 1937, and Overture to Glory of 1940. It is Overture to Glory that is the subject of my presentation now, which I want to dedicate to the memory of poet Jerome Rothenberg. He passed away exactly a month ago today at 92. Jerry's friendship and canny insight more than 50 years ago set me on the trajectory that even today brings me to events like this one. May his memory be a blessing. The ancient law dramatized what were, to at least some extent, actual historical figures. Its story, as I understand it, was drawn from the memories of the real-life Heinrich Laube, as Donald pointed out, who, as in the film, actually was the director of the Vienna Court Theater. Similarly, the American Yiddish film Overture to Glory, also known as Der Wilner Stadtchazen, the Vilna City Cantor, offers a telling of legends that had accrued over many decades concerning the Vilner Balabessel. A balabessel is a little balabos, that is a master of the house, and he was in Vilna, that great seat of Jewish learning. Legends notwithstanding, he too was an actual historical figure, a chazan named Yoel David Levenstein Strashunsky, who lived from 1816 to 1850, and was by all accounts a musical prodigy from an early age. His family had moved to Vilna when his father became the Stadtchazen of that storied city, only to die after a very few years there, circa 1830. Yoel David, though only about 15 but possessing remarkable skills, was elevated to his late father's post. In 1840, the actual Polish composer Stanislaw Moniuszko, fresh from studies in Berlin, was offered his first professional position It was as a church organist in Vilna. It should not be surprising that at some point he would then have heard the wondrous singing of the Stottchasen there, whom he evidently went to hear. It is said that, deeply impressed, the Polish composer offered to teach the Jewish chazan something of the classical tradition in which he was schooled. Actual contemporary documentary evidence for what may or may not have ensued is meager, and that is an understatement. But it does appear that with Moniuszko's support, Yoel David went to Warsaw, excuse me, where he sang in at least one concert recital for an upper-class Polish audience. Legends have inflated that appearance to accounts of his having been engaged by the city's opera, though that actually appears doubtful. Whatever the case, Yoel David undoubtedly did have encounters with modernity there, being surrounded by worldly culture and non-Jewish lifestyles. According to legend, these encounters included a romantic relationship with a Gentile woman. She may have been another singer, or she may have been a daughter of the aristocracy. Or she may have, those two may have been one and the same, that is, a countess who was a singer. Whatever did happen, the result was some sort of emotional crisis and breakdown. Yoel David left Warsaw a wanderer, making music rarely and dying young. Film, of course, is an art of light and shadow. Overture to Glory, with music by Yiddish theater composer Alexander Olshanetsky, was directed by Max Nosek, a German Jewish refugee who had come of age professionally speaking, in the heyday of German Expressionism. That is the toolkit he brought to Overture to Glory, his lone Yiddish film, in which he used light and shadow that suffuse every scene to depict the danger and allure of capital E Enlightenment that was transforming Jewish society in Eastern Europe. Pictorially, the light of modernity is most often represented in this film as coming through windows from unsheltered exterior sources, while the light of Jewish tradition burns from within, represented mostly by candles. In the ancient law, the shtetl interiors have lots of candles, but they were there to realistically and even ethnographically show what the material conditions had been like. In Overture to Glory, the candles are more of a fixture of the film imagery itself, of the source and texture of its light. Yoel David, the Vilner Balabessel, is played by the celebrity cantor Moshe Oisher. And over the course of the film, he has big scenes singing bravura cantorial numbers, first at Rosh Hashanah, later Erev Pesach, and finally at Yom Kippur. The film's time span, in other words, is a year and 10 days, from Rosh Hashanah one year to Yom Kippur the next. Here is the last minute of Oisher as Yoel David singing the Hineni in the Rosh Hashanah service that opened the film. Can we bring down the lights, Jeff? The gentleman we saw mopping his brow was Moniuszko, Along with an associate of his, he has come to Yoel David's shul to hear him sing, and the Polish composer is bowled over. He invites the cantor to his home, and so Yoel David begins clandestine visits to learn Western music. Moniuszko introduces him, of course, to Chopin, this being Poland, and to Beethoven, whose bust sits on the piano, a forbidden idol enticing the pious Jew. But then, when Moniuszko previews his own new opera for Yoel David, showing him the big tenor aria, he is astounded that the cantor can read music, can read notes, and sing the notes. At first tentatively, but then with resounding conviction as his voice moves down into his chest for real operatic projection. In that moment, Moniuszko knows it is this provincial cantor who must sing the tenor role in the opera. Can we bring down the lights? And we could probably just leave them down.
La mi la si do si la mi re do si la si do la mi la si do si la mi re do si la
Parenthesis. That aria is from Act 4 of Halka, a real opera by the real Moniuszko, initially composed in Vilna in the late 1840s, then revised for Warsaw in the later 1850s. Universally recognized as the Polish national opera, it celebrated its 1,000th performance, its 1,000th Warsaw performance, as long ago as 1935. How many since then? Who knows? This tenor aria, Shumya Yoli Nagorshitche, that is, the fir trees rustle on the mountaintop, was and is very famous and would have been familiar to many of Overture to Glory's viewers who had Polish backgrounds, for those who did, for those who were assimilated. Okay, back to Yoel David. Over the objections of his angry father-in-law, he declares his intentions to go to Warsaw to sing the opera. The wise old rabbi warns him of the danger, however, but Yoel David counters with his own idealistic universalism. We'll watch how he is framed by the window behind him with the exterior light, the light from outside the Jewish home, pouring in around him. As the rabbi responds that Yoel David will be caught between two worlds, the camera reinforces that by having the frame divided right down the middle, light on one side, black on the other, with Yoel David exactly in the middle, neither here nor there. Oh, I didn't advance. There we go.
Ich will singen zu sehen. Singen und nicht schreien. Mit meinem Kopf wird sich ins Verstehen, es auf ein Hart. Alle meine Emens, alle meine Janges, alle meine Saratoikers werden ruhig singen für mir zu dem Säulem. Und sie werden mich verstehen. Sie müssen mich verstehen.
Eine Größkeit ist gewesen bei ihnen. Wenn sie sind gekommen zu uns, die Herren, seinen mir der Leben gekommen. Bis die übergehen zu sehen, bis die stehen bleiben zwischen beide Welten und ihn nirgends mit sein kannst. Denk es, Jesu.
Despite all, Yoel David resolves to go, but before he does, he sings a goodbye lullaby to his young son Peretzel. The lullaby is Unter Bäumen, or Under Trees. Its words warn the boy to stay out of the cold. Here is the last statement of the song's main theme, followed by a heartrending chazonish coda.
Unter Bäumen wachsen groß, und die Weise winden Flossen, und die Weise winden Flossen, mein Kind, oh, ihr Herz meins, sei mir
Oh, that Pasach Aleph, oi hearts mine, oh, it just breaks my heart, that vowel. So the words to that main theme are, under trees grow grasses, and the angry winds blow. Ailulu, sleep, my little son. The fragile young grasses that grow under the tree's shelter are protected there from the angry cold winds of the outside. That is the central metaphor of Overture to Glory. In the film's view, it is in the shelter of the community and culture, with the synagogue and family at its center, that the Jewish culture can continue to grow from generation to generation. One can step outside the shelter, out of its shade and into the light, but there you are not protected from the remorseless winds. If the grass does not grow, there is no next generation. Clearly, going to Warsaw, singing opera, allows those angry winds to chill the transmission of culture, of nusach, of Jewish music in its most parochial sense. The words in another section of the song, not included in the clip we just saw, are, "Sit not by the window, my child, because you can feel the wind there. My beautiful one, I don't want you to catch cold, God forbid." With that ominous portent, Yoel David leaves for Warsaw, but not before stopping off at the synagogue to pick up his siddur, his prayer book. There he appears to begin to have second thoughts, as he is torn between the two worlds, torn between the two worlds that the rabbi had predicted. Olshanetsky's underscore makes it plain to us by having the melody of Moniuszko's aria transform into that of the lullaby. As the cantor torments himself with his doubts, the film's lighting makes the two worlds literal, splitting Yoel David's face down the middle, one half lit and the other half in darkness. The conflict between the two melodies representing the two worlds becomes grotesque in its intensity, but Yoel David has clearly made up his mind. He makes to leave the shul, and with that the film cuts to an interior space in Warsaw, framed by the icy exterior light pouring through a great half-rosette rising sun of a window. It looks out upon white snowfall over Warsaw rooftops with a church steeple in the center. There's no mistaking that this is a different culture. The view is from the rehearsal studio of the Warsaw Opera, and someone is playing Chopin at the piano. Here is that sequence, beginning in the shadow-filled synagogue. Yoel David is embraced by the aristocracy and becomes the star tenor in the upcoming production of Halka. And Wanda Mirova, a countess played by the enchanting Helen Beverly, becomes his close friend and more. The danger becomes hair-raisingly manifest when we are shown the countess taking possession of Yoel David. The scene shows her, for all intents and purposes, garroting him with his scarf. Then the camera immediately cuts to Vilna, where Peretzel is sitting with his little friend, terrifyingly immersed in the exterior light of an enormous frame-filling window, and we hear mockingly playful snippets of Unterbämer, the lullaby, in Olshanetsky's Underscore.
Erzählen Farala, als der größte Straszunski hat getrunken meine Blut.
Ihr allein. Das ist schön. Also jung, die Ablung.
Was war?
Zwei, drei, vier, fünf. Nee, Peters niet, en daar zijn fünf niet. Maar was vier niet. Weil zij zijn er noten van die Fredel als zij zouden zingen.
There's always too much to talk about in these films. There's so many details. They're so rich once you start, mining it. In Yoel David's dressing room at the opera, gazing into the mirror, he sees his face transformed into the images of those he has left behind in Vilna.
Mit Liebschaft verliert, unbeteuerte Manne.
That was an unapologetic reference to a parallel scene that appeared in The Jazz Singer not so many years before. Al Jolson's character, deplorably made up in blackface for his shameful minstrel act, looks in his dressing room mirror and sees a Yom Kippur image of his father, who he has rejected, and whom he in turn has abandoned. I blew that, I'm sorry. He sees his father who has rejected him and whom he in return has abandoned. The two films are talking to each other, but also the mirror, with an Overture to Glory's image system, has become kind of intensified window through which passes both our light and theirs. The screenplay for Overture to Glory was credited to the playwright Osip Dimov, along with director Max Nosek. But if Nosek and Dimov were credited with the screenplay, its dialogue is credited to the brilliant poet Yankov Glatstein. Listen to this flirtation between Yoel David and the Countess as she sits at the piano playing Chopin, likening the black keys to the light and shadow of her thoughts. Lichtige und schottendike, schottendike und lichtige, she says. Notice, too, how Yoel David's schottendike backdrop is black, while as the camera turns to the Countess, we see that radiant lichtige half-rosette window framing her. That light that infuses her presence is the light of, well, enlightenment, right? And that is what Yoel David is struggling with. That and, well, sex, of course.
Das sind meine musikalischen Gedanken. Ich trachte nun auf der Piano. Die Bändler reingeln sich hinter meine Finger. Und ich hab lieb zu sehen dem Schwarz-Weiß-Spiel von meinen Gedanken. Lichtige und Schuttendicke. Schuttendicke und lichtige.
Ich habe euch Gedanken wandern, wie sagt. Lichtige und Schuttendicke. Schuttendicke und Licht. Mehr Schutten wie Licht.
Yoel David becomes seized by longing for home and shul, and he goes to a synagogue to daven, which allows for another set piece demonstrating Oisher's splendid chazonis, from which this is a very short excerpt. The setting is the Mincha service, Erev Pesach, and the scene begins with him singing the Ashrei, which ironically means happy, though he's not. You'll notice that while he is foregrounded by the Jewish candles, which are hardly incidental to the frame but actually define it, at the same time, he is still wearing his top hat from the opera world.
Ashrei, Yishvi v'Yiseyecha. Ay, Yarelu Ba'alu V'Tzelo.
Back in Vilna, little Peretzel has become ill. As Yoel David's wife sings their child a reprise of the lullaby, the little boy draws his last mortal breath. Yoel David's angry father-in-law goes to Warsaw to tell the absent cantor that his son has died. He finds him in the theater wings the moment before his aria entrance. Stunned, Yoel David steps out before the Polish audience and is mute. After what is an eternity in a performance situation, in place of Moniuszko's aria, he haltingly summons a few bars of its doppelganger, the lullaby, of course. The curtain drops, and he is escorted off stage. He becomes a wanderer, only to turn up on a forbidding rainy night at his old synagogue in Vilna. But now he is looking in through the window from the dark and wet outside. It is, fatefully, Erev Yom Kippur. He steps into the candle-lit warmth of the shul's interior, where Kol Nidre is being sung. To the astonishment of the congregation, Yoel David takes over the singing of that exalted declaration of disavowal, and at its conclusion, he collapses and dies. Look at the candles now. See how he is imprisoned behind jail bars of a confining culture, but at the same time surrounded and embraced and protected by its strength and warmth. Moments later, though, the rabbi is talking about sound, about singing and praying. And the film expresses it in darkness and light as the rabbi closes Yoel David's eyes and, to remind us that no light will reach them, covers the eyes with the tallis. The camera cuts to the burning candles gathered round the Yom Kippur Machzor, still open to Kol Nidre. But the candles are extinguished when a cold wind turns the page away.
Das Fernseh hat gesingen, darin tot getan, der Wilmer, aber
And that's how a film is made. Thank you all. Thank you.
This is a veritable apotheosis of the augmented second, this film. There is more in this film, I don't know, it's just on and on. And what I was a little surprised, though, at the scene where you talk about the light and shadow with the rabbi, where the underscore is heavily augmented seconds at a point where you'd think there would be some tension or you'd be hearing some other kind of music. So Olshanetsky's like driving it home in some way through that little device.
I'm not sure what to say.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was a curious choice, but it like follows through the film. I mean, at the end there too. Again, it's just constant augmented seconds. So it seems to be over the top stereotyping in a way.
Yeah, those augmented seconds that were heard, that end titles music, for the end, that was taken from the song that he sang in front of the mirror, and it was a song by Olshanetsky, Vilna. Yeah, of which he also wrote the same year he wrote Zlatopol. So it was that notion of it was for nostalgia for audiences singing about cities back home, and that got used in underscore at various places. But a lot of the other music, didn't dwell, and it might say something about the choices that I made for clips, and I wasn't making the clips on the basis of the music so much as on the light and shadow. That was how I was choosing it. So it might be that he used the augmented seconds at those most vivid light shadow issue moments. So.
Yesh koich, by the way, that was terrific. Just a couple of small questions. In real life, did his son die, or is that a?
I'm sorry?
In real life, did his son die?
In real life, we don't know anything about Yoel David Straczynski. There are lots of sources say that this was based on a play called Der Wilner Ballabessel by the playwright Mark Arnstein, that was written at the very beginning of the 20th century. But in fact, it's not based on it at all. I mean, they're both about the Wilner Ballabessel. But in that play, it's his blind sister, who is a prophetess, who dies, who doesn't appear in this film at all. Huh. So, but he has two little boys in the film, and they're fine, in the play, and they're fine, they don't die. So whether anyone else died, we don't know. Almost everything we know is from legends and anecdotes. And you read some of the earliest account that I know was written in the 1895, and he talks about people in Vilna still remember. Well, in 1895, what would they have remembered about 1835 and 1840? they would have been maybe children and were now at an advanced age. So mostly they remember what they were told in 1860, 20 years after he died. So there's almost no contemporary documentary evidence. And there are just a lot of stories about who was there and who wasn't. So,
Yeah. So here it serves to represent like the grass, like his kind of obligation to perpetuate the tradition via a child, and it just withers. And
exactly.
And what did he mean when he says to his father-in-law at the beginning, "I'm not going to shout at them, I'm going to sing to them," about the Polish audiences, the non-Jewish audience? Do you know?
Well, first, I'm obsessive. I'm compulsive. I'll correct you. It was to the rabbi, not to his father-in-law that he was speaking. Just that. I'm like that. Forgive me.
He looked like his father-in-law.
They all had beards, and they were, you know. Someone had said. There was a line earlier that it wasn't included in this clip about shouting to them. You can't shout to them. You have to, you have to sing or something. Anyway, it was responding to something that had been said.
So is a reference to an antagonistic relationship with the non-Jewish world, or I thought maybe he meant, well, in the synagogue, I mean, I sing so loud, I'm shouting. I'm going to do something more subtle here, but
no. He's saying what Yoel David was saying was that I can't convince them by yelling, no matter how loud I talk. The way to convince them is with music. That's the way to bridge the differences that we have, and that shrine is not going to help. That was the meaning. So he's thinking that he can do what others have not done because he will sing instead of trying to convince.
So it was sort of like a tolerance project.
Yeah. Idealistic universalism, I called it, in a paper I gave in Los Angeles in 2024, in May of 2024. So.
Thank you so much for this, Ron. As always, it's such a pleasure to hear you speak and to see you in action. My question was just about your observation that initially opera was not in the original legend of Der Wildner Ballabessel, that they think he might have sung one concert or something, and then this was elevated, like deliberately elevated for the purposes of the film and possibly for the play to opera. Do you have any sort of comments or thoughts on why that decision might have been made?
Well, I don't even try to chronologize when different stories happened or didn't. It's just that it wasn't Halka by Moniuszko for sure, because Moniuszko revised it for Warsaw in the late 1850s when Stravinsky had been dead for 8 years. So,
But it seems like such a deliberate choice to move from a concert, one concert appearance, let's say, to starring in the leading role of Halka.
Well, he had no opera training. I mean, he had.
Right, of course, it's a total dramatization for the film.
Yeah. So. But there are legends. Joachim Stuczewski, who was a terrific cellist, who moved to Palestine. I think it was before the war, and settled there. And he was a major figure in Israeli music. Wrote a thin volume, kind of compiling all the different legends about Der Wildner Ballabessel. You can download it from the Yiddish Book Center. And I mislaid my copy, and it's driving me crazy. I spent more time looking for it than I did writing this paper. Stuczewski is the name.
Yeah, I think that would be interesting to be able to look through and see when this narrative shifts and why, potentially.
Yeah, no, it's very, very good.
Thank you, Ronald. It was very enjoyable and beautiful to see these clips from the film played out so lovingly. It was the story of Stuczynski's kind of a stand-in for this moment of transition in the cantorate in the 19th century, which was still salient in the time of Moshe Oisher. Do you have some thoughts about how this narrative and this particular role for Oisher speaks to tensions and issues in his career? And
Well, he was also crossing over. You know, he wasn't on the, I don't believe, to my knowledge, he was never on the opera stage, but he was on the Yiddish theater stage and on radio, and he had made Dem Chazen Zindel a year or 2, 3 years before this. So he was, he wasn't, he was courting disaster too. I mean, I'm sure there were, I don't know enough about it, and this is actually your field. I mean, there must have been people who disapproved that he did that, but at the same time, he was a tremendous celebrity. So numbers of us have been having discussions about the ridiculous plot of Dem Chazen Zindel. Mark Slobin was talking about the anachronisms in it, and so. And my thought is, who cared about the story? I mean, just like any film at that time, like any Hollywood musical, the story was almost, no one cared at all. People went, there were people who wanted to go and hear him sing. And in this film, there are these big set pieces where he's singing. I mean, these were just a fraction of the music. I mean, they're long scenes where he's singing. And I figure that's what a large, significant part of the audience went for that. On the other hand, they did hire a dream team to write the dialogue and screenplay. I mean, that's the more you start studying this, the more you realize it's it's pretty low budget, so it looks like it's not an expensive film, but it's like it's not a sophisticated film, but the writing, once you start looking at all the details and the many references within to other parts of the film and to the dialogue, it's really quite extraordinary. But I still believe that most of the audience just went to hear Moshe Oisher sing in a film, and they could feel better that he wasn't crossing over because he was singing chazonis, but it was in a film,
Okay, I think we will end it there. Thank you so much, Ron.